Hey there. I know why you're here. You're looking for a story that will help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Something calming, a little mysterious. Something that carries your mind away. Well, you've come to the right place. Before we begin tonight's journey, do me a little favor. Tap the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Even just a good night. It really helps more sleepy souls like you find their way here. Now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let's begin tonight's story. They say adopting a black cat brings bad luck. I never believed in curses until the knocking started. It came every night at exactly 1:12 a.m., slow and deliberate, echoing through the walls like someone or something was trying to get in. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, or maybe the house settling in the cold. But when the cat began hissing at empty corners, her back arched and eyes wide with terror, I realized she could see what I couldn't. What began as faint knocks grew into pounding fists, whispers behind doors, and shadows that stretched too far into the room. Each night, the terror crept closer, until it wasn't outside anymore. It was inside, watching, waiting. And the worst part, I think it doesn't want me. It wants the cat. I didn't go to the shelter looking for a black cat. It was supposed to be a quick visit, drop off some old towels, maybe see if they needed volunteers. But as soon as I stepped inside, I felt it. The air was heavy, like the walls were holding their breath. Rows of cages lined the narrow hallway, each one filled with cats meowing, pawing, demanding attention, all except for her. She sat in the far corner, a small shadow pressed against the metal bars, her green eyes locked onto mine. The moment I noticed her, and for a second, I felt pinned in place. The other cats faded into background noise as her unblinking stare rooted me to the floor. The staff called her Midnight. They didn't sound fond of her. "She's been here longer than most," one woman said, her voice low, as if worried Midnight might hear. 3 returns. "People say she changes the house." I laughed nervously and asked what that meant. But the woman only shrugged, her lips tightening. Midnight didn't move as I approached. She didn't meow, didn't twitch, just stared. Her coat looked darker than any black I'd ever seen, so black it seemed to swallow the dim light of the shelter. Against my better judgment, I whispered hello. The sound felt strange in my throat, like the air around her was thicker somehow. Then, for the first time, she blinked. I signed the adoption papers without thinking. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the way she looked at me, calm and patient, like she already knew I'd say yes. The clerk hesitated before handing me the carrier. "Cats like her, they have old souls," she murmured. "Be careful." I wanted to ask what she meant, but her eyes darted to the security camera, and she walked away before I could speak. Midnight didn't resist when I lifted her inside. She didn't struggle, didn't make a sound. It was almost disappointing how easy it was. The carrier felt heavier than I expected as I carried it to the car. The drive home was silent. Midnight sat perfectly still, her pale green eyes fixed on the road ahead, like she was memorizing every turn. I turned on the radio to cut the tension, but the static grew louder with every mile until I shut it off. By the time we reached my house, I felt ridiculous. "It's a cat," I told myself. Superstitions are just stories people use to make sense of bad luck. The house was cold when I opened the door, colder than I remembered leaving it. Midnight stepped out of the carrier with delicate precision, her paws silent against the hardwood floor. She didn't explore or sniff around. Instead, she walked straight down the hallway and sat in front of the closed bedroom door. The clock read 11:47 p.m. when I finally went to bed. Midnight hadn't moved. Her back was to me, her ears stiff and pointed toward the door. I called her softly, but she didn't respond. Sleep came slowly, the silence of the house broken only by the ticking of the old wall clock. I dreamed of scratching sounds and heavy breathing. At some point, I woke in darkness, unsure what had pulled me from sleep. My phone said 1:12 a.m. That's when I heard it. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. I froze under the blanket, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might drown out the sound. The knocks came again, slightly louder this time, like someone testing the strength of the door. Midnight hissed, a sound so deep and guttural it didn't seem possible from a cat. Her size. I sat up just enough to see her silhouette in the dim light. She was arched, tail puffed, fur standing on end, staring at the bedroom door. My breath caught in my throat as I realized I wasn't sure which side of the door the knocks had come from. I wanted to move. I wanted to tell myself it was just the wind or the pipes. But the knocks were too steady, too purposeful. Midnight's eyes glowed faintly in the darkness as she let out another hiss. Then, silence. No more knocks, no sound at all, not even the house settling. It was the kind of silence that feels alive, pressing against your ears. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning felt wrong, in a way I couldn't name. The sunlight coming through the blinds was too pale, too thin, as if it didn't quite reach the floor. Midnight sat in the same spot in front of the door, her tail curled neatly around her paws. She didn't blink when I crouched down to her level. Her green eyes looked almost glassy now, reflecting the faintest flicker of movement from the shadows. I told myself I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks after a restless night. The knocks had to have been a dream, I reasoned, the sound of old pipes expanding, but I couldn't shake the image of Midnight's arched back. The hiss that had sounded so human, it made my skin crawl. I tried to coax her to eat, shaking a little container of treats. She didn't budge. When I opened a can of food, the metallic crack of the lid echoed louder than it should have in the empty kitchen. Midnight's ears twitched slightly, but she never took her eyes off the door. It was as if she knew something I didn't. I knelt to stroke her fur, hoping the contact would calm us both, but she flinched violently at my touch and bolted under the couch. My fingers tingled where they'd brushed her coat, a faint static charge that shouldn't have been there. Work was impossible that day. Every sound from outside, the creak of the mail slot, the groan of tree branches scraping the siding, made me flinch. I caught myself glancing at the clock more than once. 1:12 a.m. had burned itself into my brain like a countdown. When I finally stepped out to take out the trash, the air felt heavier somehow, thicker with moisture, despite the clear sky. I froze when I noticed faint scratch marks on the inside of the front door. Long, uneven grooves carved deep into the wood. I tried to convince myself they were old, but I couldn't remember ever seeing them before. By evening, the house seemed colder again. Midnight had emerged from her hiding spot, but she wasn't herself. She prowled the edges of the living room, tail low and stiff, eyes darting to invisible shapes in the corners. She stopped once in front of the hallway mirror and hissed violently at her own reflection. I told myself she was still adjusting to the new space. That's what cats do, right? They act strange in new environments, but as I watched her stalk back to her spot by the bedroom door, a cold knot formed in my stomach. She wasn't adjusting, she was guarding. At 11:45 p.m., I set my phone on the nightstand and turned off the light. Midnight hadn't moved from her post at the door. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the fridge down the hall. My heart beat louder with every passing minute. Midnight's tail flicked once, twice, then stilled. The digital clock read 1:11 a.m., and then it happened again. 3 knocks, slow, heavy. This time they came from the far wall of the bedroom. Midnight's head whipped toward the sound, her ears flat against her skull. My breath caught as I stared at the wall. Nothing moved, but the air felt charged, electric like the seconds before a lightning strike. The knocks came again, harder this time, rattling a picture frame against the plaster. Midnight screeched, a sound so sharp it felt like it might split the air in two. I clutched my phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. The beam cut across the room, quivering as my hands shook. The wall was bare, no cracks, no marks. But the feeling didn't go away. It felt like someone or something was standing just on the other side, pressing its face against the thin layer of drywall, waiting. The knocks didn't come a third time that night. Instead, there was a sound like fingernails dragging across the wall, slow and deliberate. Midnight crouched low, her pupils blown wide as she let out a low growl. The sound continued, moving across the length of the room, circling us. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself over and over that it wasn't real, that I was dreaming. But when I finally drifted into a fitful sleep just before dawn, my dreams were filled with a hollow, echoing sound. Knock, knock, knock. The morning after felt wrong in a way my body understood before my mind did. The air in the house was heavier, as though it carried the weight of something unseen. Midnight was nowhere to be found. When I woke, her absence was louder than any noise could have been. I found her crouched under the couch, her wide green eyes reflecting a light that wasn't there. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch when I called her name. It was as though she'd seen something in the night that her small body couldn't process. I knelt to check on her, but her fur bristled as she backed farther into the darkness beneath the couch, hissing low and long. The sound chilled me deeper than the knocks had. I couldn't stay in the house. I made an excuse to work from a cafe that day, anything to be away from those walls. But no matter how many people were around me, I couldn't shake the sense that I'd brought something with me. The barista asked if I was all right when I jumped at the sound of a spoon clattering on tile. I smiled, muttered something about a bad night's sleep, and left early. On the walk back, the neighborhood felt unfamiliar. Trees seemed taller, their branches reaching too far into the streetlight glow. I caught movement in my peripheral vision more than once, only to turn and find empty sidewalks. By the time I got home, the sun was setting behind gray clouds. Midnight had emerged from her hiding spot and was sitting once again in front of the bedroom door, tail flicking slowly. Her eyes tracked me as I walked past, but she didn't move. I noticed faint scratches along the hallway walls now, thin and shallow like claw marks. I pressed a finger to them, hoping to feel rough wood or flaking paint, but the surface was smooth, too smooth, almost polished, like something had traced those lines with care. I tried to rationalize it. Cats scratch walls. Maybe Midnight had done it in the night, but the marks were too high, far above where her paws could reach. I ran my hand down one of them, the hair on my arms rising. There was no explanation I wanted to accept. That evening, I left all the lights on. Midnight shadow stretched long across the hallway, warped by the glow of the overhead bulb. She didn't stir even as I placed a bowl of fresh food next to her. The air seemed thicker there, the way a room feels after someone's been crying. I didn't plan to stay awake that night, but my body wouldn't let me sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding with every tick of the clock. Midnight was silent outside the door, but I could feel her presence, an unspoken warning bleeding through the thin walls. At exactly 1:12 a.m., the house went silent. The refrigerator stopped humming. The pipes stilled. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Then came the sound. Knock, knock, knock. This time it was directly behind my headboard. The thuds were heavier now, like fists pounding with growing impatience. Midnight let out a guttural yowl, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards. I sat bolt upright, my mouth dry. The knocking stopped, replaced by the faintest sound of scratching, long, deliberate strokes like fingernails grazing wood. It traced the perimeter of the room, slow enough for me to follow with my eyes. Though nothing was there, my chest tightened as I felt the shift in the air, the sensation of being watched. Not from outside, but from inside the walls. The scratching stopped at the closet door. My heart slammed against my ribs as the doorknob gave a faint rattle. Midnight hissed again, louder this time, her voice rising into a screech. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen wouldn't light up. Dead. I hadn't let the battery run down. I knew I hadn't. Then, from the darkness, a whisper. It was so faint I thought I imagined it. But the sound came again, low and hoarse, words I couldn't understand spoken from behind the closet door. Midnight howled, her claws scraping the floor as she lunged at the door, striking it repeatedly. But I could still feel it there. Whatever it was, it hadn't left. Morning came reluctantly, sunlight bleeding through the curtains like a weak apology. I hadn't slept. Midnight had retreated to a corner of the room. Her body curled so tightly, she looked like a ball of shadow. She watched me with unblinking eyes as I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to convince myself that none of it had happened. But my phone was still dead. The scratches on the closet door were still there, thin, jagged lines that hadn't been there the day before. I could no longer tell myself it was all a dream. Something had been in that room last night. Something was still here. I called the shelter that afternoon. My fingers trembled as I dialed, and I didn't know what I planned to say. Maybe I'd ask about the bad energy the clerk had mentioned. Maybe I'd beg them to take Midnight back. The line rang twice, then clicked. Silence. For a moment I thought I'd been disconnected, but then I heard faint breathing on the other end, raspy and wet, like air being dragged through lungs that didn't work right. "Hello?" I whispered. The breathing grew louder, then a voice low, almost a growl. "She sees us." My hand tightened on the phone, but before I could respond, the line went dead. The day crawled by in a haze. Midnight refused to eat again, her green eyes fixed on the front door now. Every few minutes, her tail would lash violently against the floor. She seemed smaller somehow, her fur duller than it had been when I brought her home. I caught my own reflection in the hallway mirror and froze. For the briefest moment, I thought I saw another shape behind me, tall, angular, something with limbs too long and thin to be human. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. The mirror, when I looked again, showed only me. By evening, I decided I couldn't spend another night here. I stuffed a bag with clothes and reached for Midnight. She hissed the moment my hands neared her, claws flashing as she slashed the air between us. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and for the first time I wondered if she was terrified of me, not of the thing in the walls, but of what I might already be becoming. My heart thudded in my ears. I left her there and retreated to the living room, telling myself I'd try again later. The clock ticked relentlessly toward midnight. I didn't want to see 1:12 a.m. again. I tried to leave, but the front door wouldn't open. The deadbolt twisted freely. The handle turned without resistance, yet the door refused to budge. My chest tightened as I pulled harder, my palms slick with sweat. Midnight's hiss echoed down the hall, followed by the sound of claws scraping wood. I froze, staring at the shadows pooling at the base of the door frame. They weren't just dark, they were moving, slowly, deliberately, like something gathering itself to push through. And then it came. Knock, knock, knock. The sound vibrated through the house, each strike louder than the last. Pictures rattled on the walls. Midnight screams rose, high and desperate. I pressed my back to the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The knocks didn't stop this time. They grew faster, harder, pounding like fists against the thin wood, until I swore it would splinter. My eyes darted to the windows, but they too were dark, so dark I couldn't see the streetlights outside anymore. Then, silence. I held my breath, every muscle locked tight. The stillness was worse than the noise. It felt alive, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Midnight's growls went quiet. Slowly, I turned toward the hallway. The shadows there seemed thicker now, creeping up the walls like ink spilling through water. A faint sound rose from the darkness. Breathing, long, wet, labored. I didn't want to believe it was real, but then I saw them. Fingers, long, thin, grey as ash, curling around the edge of the hallway doorframe. They flexed once, twice, as though testing their strength. Midnight launched herself at the darkness, with a scream that didn't sound like a cat at all. The fingers recoiled, and the breathing stopped. For a moment, the hallway was still. Then came the whisper. It wasn't in the hallway anymore. It was right behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't, not after what I saw. Even as the sun rose and spilled pale light across the floor, the image of those fingers curling around the doorframe burned behind my eyes. Long and too thin, they didn't belong to any human or anything that should exist in this world. Midnight hadn't moved from her spot. At the end of the hallway, her fur was puffed, her back arched, and her glowing eyes fixed on the place where the fingers had been. I wanted to believe it had all been a nightmare, but I couldn't. The scratches on the bedroom door, the cold that seemed to cling to my skin like damp cloth. The whisper I'd heard just behind me. It was real when I finally stood. My legs felt like lead. The air in the house was thick, oppressive, as though I'd stepped into a place that didn't want me there. Midnight watched silently as I crept toward the front door, hoping that whatever force had kept me trapped the night before would be gone now. The knob turned easily, the door swinging open without resistance. Sunlight streamed through, warm and golden, but it didn't feel comforting. It felt false, like stage lights casting an illusion of safety. I stepped outside anyway, gulping in the air as if I'd been underwater. But even there, something felt off. The world seemed too quiet. No birds, no distant traffic, no wind. Only the faint echo of my own breathing. I called the shelter again from my car, gripping the steering wheel with clammy hands. This time, a different woman answered. Her voice was cheerful, detached, as though reading from a script. When I asked about midnight, the line went silent for a moment too long. Then she said, "We've never had a cat by that name." I insisted, explaining I'd adopted her days ago, but the woman only repeated herself. "We don't have a record of that animal." My stomach twisted as she added, almost as an afterthought, "Are you still at the property?" When I asked what she meant, the line went dead. I didn't return to the house immediately. I drove aimlessly for hours, stopping only when I realized I couldn't avoid it forever. The sun was setting again when I pulled into the driveway, the house looming like a dark silhouette against the orange sky. My throat tightened. From the outside, it looked ordinary, perfectly still, perfectly normal. But I knew the truth. Midnight was waiting inside, and so was something else. The moment I stepped through the door, the air hit me like a wave, cold and thick with the faint scent of damp earth. Midnight sat in the hallway as before, her eyes following me silently. I tried to coax her into the carrier, desperate to take her back to the shelter, but she didn't move. Her pupils were so wide, they nearly swallowed the green of her irises. Her gaze flicked briefly toward the living room wall, and I swear I saw a shadow shift just beyond the edge of my vision. That night, I didn't bother trying to sleep. I sat on the couch, every light in the house turned on, clutching a kitchen knife in my shaking hands. Midnight didn't hiss this time. She didn't growl, she just stared, unblinking, toward the darkened hallway. At 1:12 a.m., the house went silent again. The refrigerator, the clock, even the distant hum of the streetlights outside, all gone. And then it started. Knock, knock, 3 knocks, always 3. This time from the ceiling above me. The knocks reverberated through the ceiling, 3 deliberate strikes that made dust rain down from the light fixture above. I didn't move. I couldn't. My fingers dug into the knife handle, but it felt useless, like holding a twig against a storm. Midnight's tail lashed violently, her body rigid, as her head tilted to follow the sound. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. Then came another 3 knocks, closer now, this time from the wall behind me. My stomach turned to ice as I felt the faintest vibration through the couch. Midnight let out a guttural yowl, her claws gouging the hardwood as she scrambled backward. The knocks didn't stop. They traveled around the room, moving from wall to wall, floor to ceiling, in no pattern I could follow, always in 3s. Knock, knock. The sound grew louder with each sequence, as though whatever was on the other side was testing the boundaries of its cage. I pressed my back tighter to the couch, staring at the walls, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I wanted to believe it was a raccoon in the attic, or faulty pipes, but deep down I knew better. There was an intelligence behind this, a presence. When the knocking stopped, the silence felt even heavier. Midnight's growl was the only sound, low and vibrating like a warning siren. I whispered her name, my voice breaking, but she didn't react. Her pupils were blown wide, her ears pinned flat, as if she was seeing something I couldn't. I could feel it too. A shift in the air, the unmistakable sensation of eyes on me, watching from somewhere too close. Then the whisper returned. Faint at first, it crept from the walls like a draft. I couldn't make out the words, but it wasn't random noise, it was speaking. Low and deliberate, syllables scraping like broken glass dragged across stone. Midnight hissed, the sound sharp and panicked. and bolted for the hallway. I stayed frozen, my eyes darting to every corner of the room. The whisper grew clearer as it circled me. Not in English, not in any language I recognized, but I understood its intent. It wasn't speaking to me, it was speaking about me. I don't remember moving, but suddenly I was on my feet, knife raised, backing toward the front door. My hand fumbled for the lock. It wouldn't turn. My breath came faster, fogging the glass of the door as I pressed against it. The whispering stopped. The silence pressed against my eardrums like deep water. Then came a single knock, this time from the other side of the door. I froze. The knock was softer, slower than before, almost polite. My fingers trembled as I hovered over the lock. For reasons I still can't explain, a thought bloomed in my mind, unbidden and insistent. "Open it." Midnight screeched from the hallway, the sound so sharp it made my ears ring. I jolted back from the door as the knock came again, this time louder, impatient. My back hit the wall. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Relief surged through me as I yanked it out, but the screen was black, except for a single notification: "Let us in." I threw the phone across the room. It shattered against the floor, but the message burned in my mind. Midnight's yowls grew louder, echoing off the walls. I pressed my hands over my ears, but I couldn't block it out. The knocking, the whispers, and now the sound of slow, wet breathing coming from behind me. The sound of breathing was no longer faint. It was so close I could feel the warmth of it on the back of my neck. Slow, uneven, ragged, as if each inhale dragged through lungs filled with stagnant water. I didn't dare turn around. My body locked in place. Every muscle tensed to the point of pain, as if the smallest movement might invite whatever hovered behind me to act. Midnight's guttural wails echoed down the hallway, claw strikes clicking frantically against the floorboards as she darted from one end of the hall to the other in a frenzy. The sound was animal, primal, vibrating with such intensity that it rattled something deep inside me. My own breathing was shallow and stuttered, my chest refusing to expand properly, as if the very air was too thick to pull in. I pressed myself tighter to the cold wall, gripping the kitchen knife so hard my knuckles turned bloodless white. But even the metal in my hand felt useless, flimsy against the dense, unnatural presence in the room. I kept my eyes wide, terrified that closing them would mean opening them to something I couldn't unsee. I whispered to myself that it wasn't real, over and over like a broken mantra, but my words were swallowed by the silence in the room. My skin crawled as a realization settled in. I could feel it, not just hear it, not just sense it, but truly feel it. The weight of unseen eyes pressing down from all angles. I was being watched, and it wasn't with curiosity. It was hunger. Then, breaking the silence like a knife slicing through flesh, came a sound so subtle I almost mistook it for my imagination. The faintest creak of floorboards directly behind me. My heart lurched into my throat, my pulse slamming so hard it felt like it might burst through my chest. The steps were slow, measured, deliberate, not the chaotic scurry of an animal or the creak of a house settling in the night. These were footsteps, someone walking barefoot across the old wood, each step long and unhurried. My vision tunneled as I stared straight ahead, unwilling to let my eyes dart toward the edges of my vision, where movement seemed to dance like heat haze. Midnight's cries rose to a frantic pitch, the sound so sharp it felt like it would split the air apart, but I couldn't move. Even my fingers, wrapped around the handle of the knife, trembled uselessly. The steps stopped just behind my shoulder. The oppressive presence solidified, a wall of cold pressing in. Then I felt it, warmth against my neck. Not the comforting warmth of a human presence, but a humid, putrid heat, as though something foul and alive hovered a breath away from touching skin. I don't know how long I stood there, locked in place, my body screaming to run but refusing to obey. Then came the voice, not the faint whispers from the walls, not the indecipherable rasp of something muttering from a distance. This was louder, clearer. It slithered past my ear like oil sliding across glass. The words weren't in English at first, guttural syllables breaking like brittle bones, heavy with meaning my mind couldn't grasp. My stomach churned violently at the sound. I felt the bile rise in my throat, my body screaming in revulsion at something primal and wrong. But through the distortion, 3 words emerged in a language I did understand. The voice was low, venomous, and almost amused as it hissed. "It wants her." The words cut through me like a blade of ice. My stomach turned to stone as the meaning sank in. I wanted to scream, to deny it, but my throat was locked. Midnight had stopped screaming now. The house was silent again. I risked a glance toward her in the dim light of the hallway. She sat perfectly still, tail curled tightly around her paws. Her green eyes glowed faintly, reflecting light that wasn't there, fixed on the space directly behind me. My grip tightened on the knife as I felt something shift in the air. My chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths as I tried to force my body to obey, to turn and confront whatever was there. But I couldn't. The weight of the unseen presence kept me pinned. The silence stretched, impossibly long, broken only by my hammering heartbeat and the faint hum of blood rushing through my ears. Then I felt it, a single finger tracing a slow line down the center of my spine. It was icy cold, the touch burning like frostbite, even through the fabric of my shirt. My breath hitched, and I staggered forward out of reflex. Midnight didn't move, her gaze unwavering as though tracking something unseen as it followed me into the center of the room. The lights flickered violently overhead. One by one they began to fail, plunging the house into islands of shadow. The darkness felt alive, shifting and coiling like smoke as it reached for the corners of the room. I stumbled backward, my free hand groping for the nearest wall as the temperature plummeted further. The shadows seemed to thicken, clinging to the air with a weight that made breathing feel like inhaling water. Then came the sound again, not the voice, not the whispers, the knocking, 3 sharp, deliberate strikes, this time from the floor directly beneath my feet. The impact vibrated through my legs, almost knocking me off balance. Midnight let out a sound I can only describe as a growl, deep and guttural, nothing like the fragile cries of a domestic cat. Her tail lashed, her ears flattened, her tiny frame vibrating with tension. The air in the room seemed to contract all at once. The pressure in my head built until it felt like my skull might split open. I pressed my hands over my ears as if that could block it out, but the sound wasn't just heard, it was felt. The knocks repeated, always 3. From the ceiling now, then the walls, then from directly behind me again. My body flinched with each one, my nerves raw and screaming. Midnight had crouched low to the ground, her body trembling as a sound like a snarl rumbled in her chest. The room vibrated faintly, a deep thrumming pulse that seemed to seep from the very walls. The lights flickered one last time and went out completely, plunging everything into darkness, so thick I felt blind.
And then, louder than before, the voice spoke again, this time from everywhere at once. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a rasping growl that filled the house, rattling glass in the windows. The third night, it begins.
The house felt alive now, not in the comforting, familiar way of a home filled with memory, but in the way of something sentient, watchful, and deeply hostile. The voice still reverberated through the walls, slithering through the wood and plaster, as if the building itself was its mouth. The third night, it begins. The words didn't stop echoing when the sound faded. They seemed to linger in my chest, crawling beneath my skin like a parasite, trying to burrow into my heart. Midnight had stopped growling. She was crouched in the hallway now, motionless but coiled so tightly, her muscles quivered under her fur. Her eyes reflected pale green even in the darkness, wide and unblinking, as though she no longer dared to blink. The silence that followed was worse than the knocking, worse than the whispers. It was thick and suffocating, pressing into my eardrums until I thought I might go deaf. I took a shallow breath, my lungs burning from holding it for so long. The air tasted wrong, metallic and sour like blood left too long in the open. Then, faint at first, came the sound of something scratching. Not the desperate, erratic scrabbling of a trapped animal. This was deliberate, measured, long nails or claws dragging slowly across wood. The sound started at the far end of the hallway and crept closer, 1 inch at a time. Midnight's ears pinned back so tightly, they disappeared into her head, her tail lashing once before freezing mid-air. I couldn't see anything in the hallway's darkness, but I knew it was there. The scratching stopped directly outside the living room. I held my breath as my grip tightened on the knife, the handle slick with sweat. Then, so softly I almost missed it, came 3 knocks. Knock, knock, this time from the inside of the hallway wall. My throat locked as ice spread through my veins. It wasn't outside anymore. It was in the walls, moving from room to room like blood in veins. I stumbled back toward the corner of the room, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever was coming. Midnight's gaze tracked something unseen as it moved past her, the air rippling faintly as if displaced by an invisible form. I swallowed hard against the rising bile in my throat, my heart pounding so violently it felt like it would split my ribs apart. The sound of nails dragging along the walls continued in slow, methodical passes. It circled the living room now, the boards creaking faintly, as though bearing an impossible weight. I whispered to myself to stay calm, to stay quiet, but my voice cracked halfway through the sentence. The thing paused. The scratching stopped. Silence. Then a whisper so faint I could barely register it. Say it. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. My stomach clenched in horror as I realized what it meant. Say what? Midnight's tail lashed again as she pressed her body to the floor, her fur standing on end. The air grew colder, my breath fogging in the space before me. Say it, louder this time, with a sharpness that made my ears ring. My lips moved without permission, forming words I didn't understand. The syllables were alien, guttural sounds that vibrated in my chest, as if pulled from someplace far deeper than memory. Midnight yowled, a raw, piercing sound that echoed through the house and cut off the words before I could finish. The house reacted violently. The walls groaned, wood splintering in a cascade of pops and cracks. The ceiling above bulged and buckled, as though some massive weight pressed down from above. Pictures crashed to the floor, glass shattering across the hardwood. Midnight bolted across the room, her claws clicking desperately against the boards as she leapt onto the couch. She hissed at a patch of air no more than 5 feet in front of me, her tiny body trembling violently. The air itself seemed to warp there, like heat waves rising from asphalt. Slowly, something began to take shape, an outline barely perceptible at first. Long limbs bent at wrong angles, a head cocked too far to one side, and fingers, too many fingers, curling and uncurling as they reached forward. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the rug. I hit the floor hard, the knife skittering out of reach. Midnight shrieked, hurling herself at the shifting form with claws outstretched. Her tiny body collided with nothing. She passed straight through the figure and landed hard against the far wall, crumpling to the ground with a pitiful cry. My stomach lurched as I scrambled on hands and knees for the knife, but the air was growing thicker, heavier, so dense it felt like trying to move through water. The shape in front of me solidified more with every passing second. Eyes, if they could be called that, winked open in its face. Hollow, bottomless sockets that seemed to pull in the meager light of the room. Then came 3 final knocks. This time, not from the walls, not from the floor. They came from inside my head. The impact made me cry out as a blinding pain shot through my skull, my vision going white with static. Midnight let out another desperate wail, and for the first time, I heard fear in her voice. The figure leaned closer, its face, or what passed for one, mere inches from mine. The foul heat of its presence washed over me as the voice spoke again, this time directly into my mind. 3 knocks, 3 choices. My body convulsed as the pain in my head sharpened. Images flashed before my eyes. Midnight, hissing and screeching. The shelter clerk's strange expression. Scratches on walls that hadn't been there the day before. And something else. A door in the dark. Something, someone, standing just beyond it. Waiting, the figure reached for me, with a hand of too many fingers. I screamed. Midnight launched herself at the shape again, her body colliding with it, as she let out a shriek that sounded almost human in its desperation. There was a flash of blinding light, then silence. When I opened my eyes, the house was still. Midnight was gone.
The house was silent. Too silent. Not the kind of silence that comes when the world is sleeping, but the hollow stillness of a place that has been emptied out, stripped of warmth and life. Midnight was gone. I called her name until my voice cracked, the sound swallowed by the heavy air. No tiny paws clicked against the floorboards. No green eyes blinked from the corners. Just the echo of my own desperate whisper. I felt hollow, as though something had been scooped out of me while I wasn't looking. She had been the only thing standing between me and whatever this was, and now she was gone. The house felt larger now, every shadow stretching too far, every creak in the wood beneath my feet resonating like footsteps. I tried to leave, but the front door wouldn't budge. The deadbolt turned freely. The handle moved without resistance, but it didn't open. The windows too were wrong. The glass was cold to the touch, slick like ice, but when I pressed my face to it, there was nothing outside. No street, no sky, just blackness, thick and impenetrable. My chest tightened as a cold realization settled over me. I wasn't locked inside the house. The house was locked around me. I staggered back from the window, my breath fogging in the frigid air. I could still feel it here,
that same presence that had haunted me for nights. It wasn't hiding anymore. It didn't need to. Slowly, I turned toward the hallway. The air was thick there, darker somehow, as though light itself avoided it. At the end of the hall, the closet door stood slightly ajar. I could have sworn I'd closed it. A faint draft curled out from the crack, carrying with it a smell of damp earth and rot. My stomach turned. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, but deep down I knew there was something behind that door, something waiting. I moved cautiously down the hall, the knife still clutched in my shaking hand. Every step felt like an invitation for whatever was on the other side to strike. The air grew colder as I approached, my breath coming out in small white clouds. The door creaked open another inch, as though beckoning me closer. My legs felt like lead, but some unseen pull dragged me forward. When I was only a foot away, the whisper came again, soft, urgent, directly in my ear. "Open it." I stumbled back, heart hammering. The voice wasn't just sound. It carried weight, pressing against my skull from the inside. My vision swam, darkness curling at the edges. I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed my palms to my temples, whispering "no" over and over. But the voice didn't stop. It repeated the command, louder now, sharper, slicing through my resistance like glass. "Open it." My hand reached forward before my mind gave the order. Fingers brushing the cold wood, I felt the grain ripple beneath my touch, like the surface of water. A faint vibration pulsed through the door, in sync with my heartbeat. I gritted my teeth and pulled my hand away, stumbling backward. The air in the hallway shifted, then denser, heavier, and from behind the door came a sound. I'll never forget 3 knocks. The sound of the knocks vibrated through the doorframe, deep and resonant, like a fist pounding on the walls of a coffin. Each strike sent a shiver through my body, my teeth chattering as I stumbled backward down the hall. I wanted to run, but where? There was nowhere to go. The front door refused to open. The windows looked out onto nothingness, and now the house itself seemed to pulse faintly, as if it had grown a heartbeat, the walls expanding and contracting with each phantom thud. I clutched the knife tighter, though I no longer believed it could protect me. Against whatever was in here, steel was useless. A whisper rose behind me, so faint I thought it might be the blood rushing in my ears. But it grew louder, insistent, words sliding over my skin like cold breath. 3 nights, 3 knocks, 3 choices. I spun, the hallway empty behind me, but the voice came from everywhere now, as if the house itself spoke. My stomach turned as the words repeated, louder, vibrating through the floorboards. 3 nights, 3 knocks, 3 choices. Midnight's absence felt heavier than ever, her tiny body and fierce hisses, once the only barrier between me and this thing. Without her, I felt like a fly caught in a web, each thread tightening as the spider crawled closer. The closet door creaked wider with a long, slow moan. From the black gap inside, a draft oozed out, carrying a stench of wet soil and decay so thick it made my eyes water. I staggered back, choking on the taste of rot in the air. The knife slipped from my sweat-slick fingers and clattered to the floor. A laugh, a low, guttural rasp, echoed through the house. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything. The sound vibrated deep in my bones, shaking loose a fear so primal, it felt older than I was. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by silence, so complete it pressed into my skull like a vice. Then, a single word, so sharp it felt like a knife to the brain. Choose. My head throbbed as images flashed across my mind. Midnight standing in the corner, hissing, the shelter clerk's strange expression, the outline of fingers curling around a doorframe. My knees buckled, and I fell hard against the wall. Pain shot up my side, but I barely noticed. The house had grown darker somehow. The lights flickered weakly, dimming until the hallway became little more than a tunnel of shadows. Choose. The voice growled again. This time, 3 distinct doors flickered in my vision. None of them existed in the house. Not yet. One was black, featureless, its surface absorbing all light. One was red, slick, and pulsing faintly, as if alive. The last was white, pristine but humming faintly, with something unseen. I pressed my hands over my eyes, but the images burned on my eyelids. The voice spoke once more, whispering with a venomous patience. One for escape, one for truth, one for pain. The closet door slammed fully open then, hitting the wall with a deafening bang. I flinched violently as the temperature plummeted further. From inside the closet came a sound I couldn't comprehend, a wet, shuffling movement, like flesh dragging across wood. Something was coming through. I could feel it. My body screamed to run, but there was nowhere left to run. The house was no longer a house. It was a trap. The air in the hallway thickened until it felt like wading through molasses. Each breath came harder, the cold pressing into my chest like an icy hand, squeezing my lungs. The knife lay forgotten on the floor behind me. My focus was fixed on the black void yawning from the closet. Whatever had opened that door was still inside, but not for long. A sound drifted out, wet and irregular, like something dragging a heavy body across damp wood. The stench of decay grew stronger, clinging to the back of my throat until I gagged. My mind screamed for action, but my body refused to obey. It felt like I was pinned in place by invisible hands, my skin crawling as if hundreds of tiny insects skittered across it. Then came the voice again, closer, louder, and dripping with mockery. 3 nights, 3 knocks, 3 choices. The words wrapped around my brain like barbed wire, each syllable digging deeper until tears pricked my eyes. Images flickered at the edges of my vision, the 3 doors, black, red, and white, pulsing faintly, waiting. The voice hissed, "One will save, one will damn, one will reveal." My stomach churned violently as the air shifted, colder still. The sound of dragging grew louder, joined by a new noise, labored breathing, wet and rattling like air, forcing its way through collapsed lungs. Midnight's absence pressed against me like a lead weight. She would have been hissing by now, her body rigid and tail lashing, warning me. Without her, I felt utterly exposed. Suddenly, a long, pale hand shot out of the closet, slapping against the floor with a sickening thud. Its fingers were impossibly long, jointed too many times, the skin stretched thin over bone. Blackened nails scraped the wood as it pulled itself forward. Another hand appeared, then a shoulder, then part of a torso. The shape was humanoid only in the vaguest sense. Its limbs bent wrong, like a marionette assembled by someone who'd never seen a human. Its skin was grey, wet-looking, and streaked with filth. No face yet, just a void where features should be. Darkness shifting in the hollow of its skull. I choked on a sob as the thing crawled another few inches, its 2 long fingers leaving grooves in the floorboards. The voice rumbled again, directly in my skull, this time each word vibrating my teeth. "Choose, or it chooses for you." The image of the three doors burned hotter now, so vivid they seemed to float in front of me. Black, red, white. My gut twisted. Every instinct screamed not to touch them, but the thing dragging itself out of the closet didn't intend to wait. Its torso was free now, ribs jutting beneath the grey skin, twitching as if something moved beneath the surface. The air vibrated with a sound like distant screaming, dozens of voices layered over one another, some pleading, some laughing, some weeping. My body jerked into motion, not from my own will but some unseen force yanking me forward. My hand shot up as if grasping for one of the floating doors. Heat pulsed from the red one, cold from the black, and the white hummed faintly, like a swarm of insects trapped just beyond the wood. The creature's head was emerging now, blank, featureless, except for a vertical slit where the mouth should be. It widened slowly into a grin too large for its face, filled with rows of needle-like teeth. Its breathing came faster, wet and eager. My fingers brushed the surface of the red door, and it pulsed beneath my touch like a living heart. The voice hissed with delight. Yes, but before I could press further, a sharp sound cracked the air. Midnight's hiss. I spun wildly. There she was, at the end of the hall, fur puffed out and tail like a bottle brush. Her green eyes burned like twin lanterns in the dark. She let out a yowl that made the air vibrate, and for a split second, the creature hesitated. Midnight lunged, claws flashing. She collided with the grey mass, and there was a blinding flash of light. The flash of light was blinding, searing my retinas as if someone had set off a camera flash an inch from my face. I stumbled back, throwing an arm over my eyes. The images of the black, red, and white doors burned like after-images into my vision. When the glare faded, the hallway looked unchanged, except Midnight was standing there, tail puffed, her body trembling with tension. Her claws clicked against the hardwood as she shifted her weight, never taking her eyes off the closet. My heart pounded so hard, it made my chest ache. I wanted to call her name, but the sound died in my throat. Behind her, the creature was no longer dragging itself forward. It had stopped halfway out of the closet, its blank head cocked slightly, as if listening. Its mouth, if that slit of teeth could be called a mouth, remained locked in a grin too wide for its skull. Midnight hissed again, louder this time, the sound reverberating unnaturally through the house. The creature flinched, not visibly, but I felt the shift in the air, as though the pressure in the room had lightened for a moment. Midnight stepped forward, claws extended, her tail lashing like a whip. The voice returned then, harsher than ever, cutting into my skull like a serrated blade. Choose, now, or lose everything. The three doors flickered violently, their forms unstable, as if they might vanish at any moment. My hand still hovered near the red door, heat pulsing from it in waves. The black door oozed cold so intense my skin ached. The white door vibrated faintly, humming with some sound I couldn't place. Midnight yowled a third time, and the creature began retreating, its two long fingers scrabbling against the floorboards as it dragged itself back into the dark closet. The voice screamed now, angry, desperate. It roared so loud the walls shook, picture frames falling to the ground and shattering. My head throbbed under the weight of its fury. Midnight leapt at the closet, her small body vanishing into the darkness after the retreating form. The door slammed shut with a deafening crack that echoed through the house like a gunshot. For a long moment, nothing moved. I stared at the closet, my chest heaving, the images of the 3 doors still floating faintly in my vision. Slowly, they began to fade, their edges fraying like burning paper, until they winked out completely. Silence descended. The oppressive weight in the air lifted slightly, though not entirely. I forced myself to take a deep breath, my legs trembling beneath me. Midnight hadn't returned. I called her name once, twice, my voice raw and hoarse, but the only answer was the faint groan of settling wood. My hands shook violently as I staggered back toward the living room, collapsing into the couch. The knife lay abandoned in the hallway, but I couldn't bring myself to retrieve it. It felt pointless. Against something like that, a blade was just decoration. As I sat there in the dim light, the house seemed to shift around me. The air felt different, not safe, not free of the presence, but changed somehow, less predatory, more watchful. My eyes burned from exhaustion and unshed tears. Midnight had fought it back. Somehow, she had held it off. But at what cost? My chest ached with the thought that I might never see her again. Then I heard it, soft, faint, but unmistakable. The sound of claws clicking against hardwood. My head snapped up. Midnight emerged from the shadows of the hallway, her fur still puffed, her green eyes glowing faintly. She padded into the room slowly, her tail flicking low. Relief washed over me so quickly. My knees went weak, and I nearly sobbed. I reached for her, whispering her name. She stopped just short of my hand, her gaze sharp and unblinking. There was something in her eyes now, something more than before. She wasn't just a cat anymore. Before I could process it, the voice returned softer now, almost amused. 3 nights remain. The house no longer felt like a structure of wood and plaster. It was something else now. An organism, breathing in long, patient cycles. Each inhale seemed to pull the air tight around me, and every exhale left the walls groaning faintly, as if they strained under some immense weight. Midnight sat across the room, her emerald eyes twin beacons in the dimness. She hadn't moved for hours, her tail curled neatly around her small, tense frame. She wasn't blinking, wasn't purring, wasn't even twitching an ear, just watching. I tried to meet her gaze, but there was a weight behind it now that I didn't recognize, something older and deeper than any cat should hold. The lamp beside me flickered once, its weak light struggling against the darkness that had thickened since the last knock. The smell of damp wood and decay lingered in the air, curling in my nostrils and clinging to the back of my throat, until I tasted it with every shallow breath. My fingers ached from gripping the armrest, nails digging deep into the worn fabric, and I realized I was waiting, not for silence, but for the next sound, the one that would mean the thing in the walls hadn't gone, hadn't forgotten me. I had stopped believing the house was just a house. It had a mind now, or perhaps it always had one, and I had simply been too blind to see it. Outside the windows was nothing. No moonlight, no street lamps, not even the faint orange glow of distant city lights. Just a void so absolute, it felt like looking into the pupil of some cosmic eye. I pressed my hand to the cold glass earlier, and the surface rippled faintly beneath my fingers like water disturbed by breath. I'd pulled back quickly, my heart pounding, as if touching it for too long would have let something on the other side grab hold of me. Midnight's eyes had followed the movement, her tail twitching once, then going still again. In the silence, I could hear her faint breathing, a slow, measured sound that seemed almost deliberate. I wondered if she was waiting too, if she knew what I was starting to suspect. that the thing in the house wasn't content to stay hidden anymore. It had tested me, it had warned me, and now it wanted more. The first sound came faintly, so subtle I thought it was my imagination at first. A soft brushing, like fingertips grazing wood. My pulse quickened as I tilted my head, straining to hear. The sound came again, louder this time, dragging along the baseboards like nails scraping just beneath the surface. Midnight's ears flicked toward it, her body tensing, but she didn't hiss or run. The brushing shifted location, moving from one wall to the next, in a slow, deliberate path. It wasn't random, it was searching. My breath caught in my throat as the brushing stopped directly behind the couch where I sat. The air grew colder, heavy with that familiar stench of rot and damp earth. I could feel it now, something large pressing close from the other side of the wall, its presence so palpable. I swore I heard the faint sound of ragged breathing. I wanted to stand, to flee to another room, but my legs refused to obey. My muscles felt locked in place, as if the house had wound invisible cords around me, anchoring me to the spot. The brushing sound was replaced by silence so dense it rang in my ears, my own heartbeat pounding like a drum in my chest. Midnight's tail lashed once against the floorboards before curling tightly again. Then, without warning, 3 sharp knocks struck the wall behind my head. The force of them vibrated through the couch, rattling the lamp on the side table. I gasped, clutching my chest as my heart slammed into my ribs with enough force to hurt. Midnight didn't move. She didn't flinch, but her eyes burned brighter now, as though some inner light had kindled within them. The knocks were followed by a whisper, soft but clear, drifting out from the walls like smoke seeping through cracks. 3 remain. The words slid into my ears, bypassing sound entirely and lodging deep in my mind. I clamped my hands over my ears instinctively, but it didn't help. The voice was inside, curling through the folds of my brain, sticky and warm like oil. 3 remain, it repeated. The words layered now, one voice over another, some male, some female, some in languages I couldn't comprehend. My stomach churned violently as I felt the house shift again, the walls seeming to pulse in time with those words. I didn't know if the 3 referred to nights, doors, or something worse. I forced my body to move, one shaky limb at a time, standing with an effort that felt monumental. Midnight's eyes followed me, unblinking, as I took a tentative step toward the hallway. My plan, if I could even call it that, was to check the closet door again. Part of me needed to see it still closed, still solid. But as my foot hit the first creaky floorboard, a sound froze me in place. A faint giggle, high-pitched, childlike. It came from deep inside the house, echoing faintly, as though carried on a breeze. Midnight's tail lashed violently now, her ears flattening against her skull. The giggle came again, closer this time, and the walls seemed to lean inward slightly, their angles wrong somehow, as though the house had decided to breathe me in. I stumbled back toward the couch, my body screaming in protest. Midnight leapt from her spot, landing gracefully near the hallway entrance. She turned her head to look at me once, her gaze so intense it felt like a command, "Stay." Then she padded silently into the shadows, swallowed by the dark beyond. I called her name, my voice breaking, but she didn't return. The giggle faded, replaced by a slow, dragging sound again, this time much heavier, much closer.
And from deep in the house, the voice returned, louder now, almost amused. 3 nights, 3 knocks, 3 choices.
The dragging sound grew louder as I stood frozen by the couch, my legs trembling so violently I thought they might buckle. It wasn't fast. This sound, it moved with the slow, deliberate patience of something that knew I had nowhere to run. Each scrape of whatever heavy thing it dragged across the floorboards echoed up through the soles of my feet, vibrating deep in my bones. My hand clutched the edge of the couch until my knuckles turned white. Midnight had disappeared into the hallway moments ago, and the silence she left in her wake was unbearable. The house seemed to hold its breath with me, the air so thick and cold it burned my lungs with every shallow inhale. Then it came again. 3 nights, 3 choices. The words weren't whispered this time. They boomed through the walls like a low chant. Each syllable stretched long and deep, carrying a resonance that rattled picture frames and made the floor groan underfoot. I stumbled backward instinctively, my shoulder colliding with the wall so hard pain shot through my arm. The voice continued, almost sing-song now, layered with tones so dissonant it made my teeth ache. 1 door saves, 1 door damns, 1 door ends. The image of the 3 doors flickered behind my eyes again. Black, red, white. This time though they didn't hover, they stood solid in my mind's eye, full-sized, towering, and pulsing faintly with a sickening organic rhythm. The dragging noise stopped suddenly, replaced by the sound of soft breathing, wet and irregular, like air forcing itself through broken lungs. It came from the hallway now, just beyond the edge of my vision. Midnight still hadn't returned. I considered calling her name again, but something in my gut told me not to make a sound. The house felt predatory, its walls leaning in like a throat preparing to swallow. The breathing shifted closer, accompanied by the faintest creak of weight on the floorboards. My heart pounded so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. A bead of cold sweat slid down my spine, soaking into the waistband of my jeans. Then, so soft I almost missed it, came a sound that turned my stomach cold. A second giggle. This one wasn't childlike. It was cracked and broken, like a laugh forced out of lungs too damaged to hold air. The lamp flickered violently, casting jagged shadows that twisted across the room. One of them lingered a fraction too long, a warped silhouette of a figure with limbs bent at impossible angles and a head cocked far to the side. I blinked, and it was gone, but the sound of fingers dragging along the walls remained. "Choose," the voice hissed again, closer now, as though speaking from just behind my ear. I spun, but there was nothing there. My chest tightened painfully as I realized I was still holding the knife. My hand wrapped so tightly around the handle, my skin had turned white. The blade felt absurdly small in the face of whatever moved within the house, but I couldn't let it go. It was the last piece of normality I had. A sudden sharp yowl tore through the silence, and my stomach flipped in recognition. Midnight, the sound had come from deeper in the house. Somewhere past the hallway, relief and dread warred in my chest. She was alive, but for how long? Another yowl echoed, followed by a low, guttural growl that wasn't hers. My body moved before I could think. Knife in hand, I took one unsteady step into the hallway, then another, each footfall loud as thunder against the boards. The air here was colder, thick with that now familiar stench of rot and wet earth. The walls seemed to narrow as I moved, pressing closer, their surfaces rippling faintly like a throat flexing.
The voice whispered again, low and urgent this time. Closer, you're almost there. The closet door loomed ahead, closed but trembling faintly as though something immense pressed against it from the other side. Midnight's hisses and growls came in rapid succession now, echoing weirdly through the house, as though the walls themselves were trying to swallow them. My grip on the knife tightened until my palm ached. I was shaking so badly I nearly tripped over my own feet, but I couldn't stop moving forward. Each step felt less like my own, and more like being pulled by unseen strings. The images of the 3 doors hovered again in my mind, this time flashing rapidly like warning lights. Black, red, white. The voice repeated its chant, faster now, almost frantic. 3 nights, 3 knocks, 3 choices. When I reached the closet, I hesitated. Midnight's sounds had stopped. The silence pressed in thick and heavy, a weighted blanket that smelled of death. My free hand rose of its own accord and settled on the door handle. It was ice cold, the metal burning my skin as though coated in frost. The house seemed to tilt slightly, the floor angling beneath my feet, until I was sure I'd fall forward into the dark. My reflection in the brass doorknob stared back at me, distorted and stretched, my eyes wide with terror. A faint whisper slipped through the crack of the door, almost gentle in contrast to the earlier chants. Choose, or I choose for you.
The doorknob felt alive under my palm, the metal vibrating faintly as though something enormous on the other side breathed against it. I should have pulled away, should have turned and run, but my fingers tightened instead. My reflection walked in the brass, my mouth stretched in a silent scream I wasn't aware I was making. The air pressed harder against my chest, squeezing until my ribs creaked. Somewhere behind me the faint dragging sound returned, slow and deliberate. It was in the walls again, circling like a predator sizing up its prey. The voice whispered in time with the movement. 3 nights, 3 knocks, 3 choices, 3 doors, the words wrapped tight around my skull like a band of iron, pulsing with each syllable. Midnight's yowl split the air again, closer now but muffled as though she were buried deep inside the walls. My hand flinched at the sound, the cold metal of the knob biting my skin. For a moment, the house seemed to sigh, a deep creak that ran from floor to ceiling. The 3 doors flashed in my vision once more, their surfaces alive with faint movement. The black one rippled like liquid shadow. The red one throbbed with each of my heartbeats, its surface slick as though coated in blood. The white door glimmered faintly, cracks forming across its pristine surface like ice fracturing under weight. The voice coiled tighter now, no longer whispering but speaking directly into the base of my skull. Time ends. Choose. I pressed my forehead to the door, my breath fogging the cold wood. I didn't want to open it. Every nerve in my body screamed not to, but my hand was turning the knob now, the metal's icy burn cutting deep into my skin. Midnight's growls grew louder, and I could swear I heard a second voice beneath hers, low, guttural, and laughing. The house vibrated faintly, as though amused by my hesitation. My vision swam, the 3 doors pulsing faster, their forms superimposed over the closet in front of me. The voice repeated its chant, each word cracking like a whip. 1 saves, 1 damns, 1 ends. Choose. I forced myself to step back, my fingers slipping from the knob. My breathing came in shallow gasps, every inhalation tasting of rot and mildew. The hallway behind me was darker than before, almost liquid in its blackness.
I could feel it watching me, the house, the thing inside it, midnight, all of them. Something brushed the back of my neck. Then a faint, cool touch like a fingertip dragging across my skin. I jerked forward with a strangled cry, my shoulder colliding with the door so hard it rattled on its hinges. The voice laughed, deep and guttural, shaking the walls. Coward, it growled, its amusement, a physical pressure pressing down on my chest. The house seemed to lean in closer, and the air thickened with a sickly sweet scent, like rotting flowers. Midnight's cries had gone silent again. Panic clawed at my throat. What if she was gone? What if my hesitation had doomed her? The image of her tiny body disappearing into the closet flashed in my mind, and my stomach lurched violently. The voice returned, calmer now, almost coaxing. The doors are waiting. Do not delay. I shook my head violently, gripping my skull as though I could wrench the words out by force. But they were lodged too deep, coiled tight around my thoughts, like a constrictor. Then, without warning, the house shifted. The floor beneath my feet tilted sharply, sending me sprawling backward into the wall. Pain shot up my spine. As the house groaned louder, the sound vibrating in my teeth. My vision darkened at the edges, the hallway elongating unnaturally, as though the house was stretching itself around me. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled again under the shifting floor. The 3 doors flickered violently now, overlaying the closet so completely. It felt as though all of them existed in the same space. The black door rippled like a pool disturbed by wind. The red one pulsed faster, its surface bulging faintly, as though something inside pressed against it. The white door's cracks deepened, light leaking from the fractures in thin, blinding streams. Choose. The voice was a roar now, shaking plaster from the ceiling. My ears rang violently, pain lancing through my skull. The temperature plunged, frost creeping along the walls in jagged patterns. My breath fogged so thick, it felt like I was drowning in my own exhalations. My shaking hand lifted toward the doors, unsure which one it meant to touch. But before my fingers could make contact, a sound cut through the chaos, a sharp, guttural hiss. Midnight. Her green eyes glinted from the shadows at the end of the hallway, glowing like twin lanterns in the dark. She stepped forward slowly, her fur puffed, her tail lashing violently. Her eyes met mine, and in that instant, I felt something settle in my chest. Resolve, maybe, or acceptance. Midnight didn't break her stare as she let out another hiss. Louder this time, so loud it seemed impossible from a creature her size. The house shuddered violently in response, the walls rippling like disturbed water. The voice screamed, its sound distorted and panicked, now too late. The scream tore through the house, a sound so vast it seemed to erupt from every wall, floorboard and rafter at once. My hands shot up instinctively to cover my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't just heard, it was felt. It vibrated in my teeth, rattled my ribcage, and clawed at the soft meat of my brain like 1,000 tiny fingers. Midnight stood her ground at the end of the hallway, her back arched, tail fluffed to twice its size. Her eyes burned brighter now, green light flaring like twin torches, illuminating the warped hallway as if it were a tunnel leading straight to the heart of something unspeakable. The voice screamed again, this time layered with countless others, high and low, male and female, some sobbing, others laughing. Too late, too late. The house decides. The 3 doors flickered violently in front of me,
their forms unstable. The black door rippled as though something immense pressed against its surface from within. The red door bulged and contracted with each beat, its pulse quickening as though mirroring my own panicked heart. The white door's cracks had spread entirely across it, now light pouring from them in blinding rays that cast harsh, shifting shadows along the walls. Midnight hissed again, louder, and the sound seemed to disrupt the vision. For a brief instant, the doors wavered, the house pausing in its movement, like a predator startled by unexpected resistance. But then the floor tilted again, more violently this time, sending me sprawling forward toward the closet. My hand struck the floor hard, the knife clattering from my grasp and skittering out of reach. The house let out a groaning sound, deep and satisfied, as the closet door began to swing open of its own accord. The stench of rot and damp soil rolled out in a suffocating wave. I coughed violently, my lungs burning, tears streaking down my cheeks as the darkness within the closet seemed to thicken, coalescing into a shape. Long limbs unfolded from the void, impossibly thin and jointed in too many places. Fingers scraped along the doorframe as a featureless head emerged, cocked slightly to one side in an almost curious gesture. The voice returned, softer now but no less terrible. 3 nights, 3 knocks, 3 choices you would not choose, so we chose for you. Midnight darted forward, her body a blur of motion. She slammed into the closet door just as the creature began to step through, her tiny frame impossibly strong as the wood cracked loudly under the impact. The force knocked the door partially shut again, and the thing inside let out a hiss that wasn't quite sound, more like the vibration of air passing through something wrong-shaped. Midnight clawed and hissed, her eyes glowing so brightly now that they seemed to cast their own light. But I could see it, the creature was stronger. Slowly, inexorably, the door began to creak open again. The voice hissed with delight. "It comes, you are the key." I scrambled to my knees, hands searching wildly for the knife. My fingers brushed it just as the creature's hand shot out from the gap in the door. Long fingers wrapped around Midnight's tiny body, lifting her with impossible speed. She yowled, claws flashing as she raked at the grey flesh, but the thing didn't flinch. It dragged her into the dark, and the door began to swing shut behind them. My body moved on instinct. With a hoarse scream, I lunged forward, slamming my palm against the door just before it clicked shut. The impact jarred my shoulder painfully, but I pushed harder, trying to force it open. Midnight's cries echoed from the darkness inside, sharp and desperate. "Choose," the voice demanded again, but now it sounded different, urgent, almost afraid. The 3 doors flared one last time, their forms stabilizing just enough for me to see them clearly. My vision swam as my hand hovered between them. Black, red, white, each throbbed faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that felt disturbingly like my own heartbeat. The white door cracked wider, spilling blinding light. The black door rippled violently, the sound of muffled sobbing seeping from within. The red door pulsed in sync with Midnight's fading yowls. My hand trembled violently as I reached out. And then I touched the red door. The house screamed, the closet door flew open, and I was blinded by a wave of searing heat that blasted out like a furnace igniting. I stumbled backward, the world spinning wildly as the walls seemed to ripple like disturbed water. Midnight shot out of the darkness, her fur singed but her eyes burning brighter than ever. She landed in front of me,
hissing at the void as the creature screamed in a voice that was many voices, male, female, old, young, all layered atop one another in a deafening chorus. The red door's pulse quickened until it was a blur, then stopped abruptly as it shattered inward in a spray of viscera and black smoke. Silence fell so suddenly it felt like I'd gone deaf. Midnight turned to look at me, her glowing eyes softening slightly. She padded forward and pressed her head gently against my hand. The house shuddered once, then stilled, and the voice spoke one final time, faint and distant. 2 nights remain.
The house was no longer simply a place where I lived. It had become something else entirely, a thing that breathed in the shadows and pulsed beneath the floorboards. Each creak of the wood now felt intentional, each groan of the walls a whisper, meant only for me. Midnight had not moved from her perch on the couch. Her green eyes were unblinking, glowing faintly, as though lit from within by something I could not name. Outside the window, the world was void, a featureless black that seemed to press against the glass with the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes. I hadn't seen sunlight since the knocking began, and I wondered if I ever would again. My body felt heavy, my limbs leaden from lack of sleep, but fear kept my mind sharp and raw. 2 nights. That's what it had said. 2 nights, 2 knocks, 2 choices. The refrain looped in my head like a song I couldn't shut off, and with each repetition, the house seemed to shrink tighter around me. The air smelled different now, thicker, tinged with a metallic sweetness that clung to my nostrils and left a foul taste on my tongue. It was the scent of rot hidden beneath fresh paint, of dampness settling deep in walls that had seen too many winters. Midnight's tail twitched once, a small but violent movement that snapped my attention toward the hallway. It was darker there than it should have been. The shadows clung unnaturally thick, their edges too sharp, too deliberate. I felt my pulse quicken as my eyes tried to adjust, but no amount of staring revealed anything beyond that black curtain. Then I heard it, a faint tapping sound, light and tentative, like fingernails brushing wood. My stomach twisted as the sound traveled, moving along the walls with a liquid ease that made my skin crawl. Midnight hissed low, the sound rumbling against my leg where she pressed herself tightly against me. The tapping grew louder as it circled the room, the rhythm uneven and erratic. It was too fast to be a person, but too deliberate to be an animal. Each brush of unseen fingers against the plaster seemed to vibrate through the house's frame, echoing faintly in my ribs. I gripped the knife in my lap tighter, though I knew it was a futile gesture. The blade felt ridiculous now, a fragile toy against whatever intelligence prowled these walls. Somewhere deep within me, a voice, my own voice, begged me to run, but I couldn't move. The house had become a predator, and I was prey caught in its gaze. My mind flickered to the other doors, the black and the white. Their images floated behind my eyes, ghostly and insistent. One would save, one would damn. One had already been chosen, and its consequences still rippled through the air, unseen but felt in every tense breath. I didn't have to wait long for the next sound. 3 sharp knocks cracked against the wall directly behind my head, so loud they rattled the picture frames and sent a puff of dust drifting from the ceiling. Midnight's back arched immediately, her fur standing on end as she let out a guttural yowl. The sound seemed to bounce off the walls, a desperate warning to something I couldn't see. My hands trembled violently as I pressed the knife tighter against my chest, my fingers slick with sweat. The air temperature plummeted so fast, my breath fogged in the dim light, curling and twisting in front of me like grasping hands.
I heard the whisper then, soft but clear, coiling in my skull with a familiarity that made my stomach heave. 2 nights, 2 knocks, 2 choices. The words weren't sound, they were sensation, vibrating deep in my bones. Midnight hissed again, louder this time, and her glowing eyes darted toward the hallway. A new sound joined the knocking, footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. They weren't mine, they weren't hers. Something else walked the halls now. The sound was subtle at first, almost cautious, but each step carried a weight that vibrated faintly through the floorboards. I froze, every muscle in my body locking, as if the house itself had commanded stillness. Midnight crouched low on the couch, her tail lashing furiously. The footsteps paused, then resumed, this time a little faster, a little heavier. My throat went dry, as I realized it wasn't just pacing, it was heading toward the living room. I tightened my grip on the knife until my knuckles whitened. Each footfall sounded closer now, their rhythm growing uneven, as though the creature dragging itself toward me had too many limbs, some moving in harmony, others out of sync. The voice returned, this time softer and almost amused. It hungers, it waits. You are its feast. My stomach lurched violently, bile rising in my throat. I forced myself to stand, legs shaking violently beneath me. Midnight's eyes flared brighter, her body tensed to spring. The hallway seemed impossibly long now, its edges twisting faintly like heat rising off asphalt. I swore I saw movement in the shadows, a pale hand curling briefly around the doorframe before vanishing back into the darkness. A low moan seeped from the walls, vibrating in my teeth. I stumbled backward, my shoulder colliding with the edge of the couch. Midnight leapt gracefully to the floor, positioning herself between me and the hallway. Her growl deepened, and for a brief mad moment, I wondered if she'd fight the thing alone. The footsteps stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was absolute, so thick it felt like wool stuffed in my ears. I waited, heart pounding, lungs burning as I realized I'd been holding my breath. Then came the whisper, softer than ever, but carrying a weight that nearly drove me to my knees. 2 remain, 1 for you, 1 for it.
The silence didn't last. From somewhere deep within the house, a sound began. A faint, wet, dragging, like something heavy and half alive being pulled across the floorboards. It started softly, a distant suggestion, but quickly grew louder until it pressed against my eardrums with nauseating clarity. The air seemed to tighten in my lungs as I realized it wasn't coming from one place. It was everywhere, above, below, within the very walls. Midnight's ears flattened against her head, her fur bristling as she hissed, her body low to the ground in a tense crouch. The house responded with a groan that rolled beneath my feet, rattling the teeth in my skull. I stumbled backward instinctively, my shoulders colliding with the cold, unyielding wall. My fingers ached from how tightly I clutched the knife, but I didn't dare loosen my grip. The dragging stopped as suddenly as it had begun. A beat of total stillness followed. Then 3 deliberate knocks hammered against the wall opposite me. The sound was deafening, sending a pulse through the floor that nearly knocked me off balance. Dust cascaded from the ceiling in thin streams, settling on my sweat-damp hair. The voice came again, its tone lower now, resonant enough to vibrate deep in my ribcage. 2 choices remain. 1 door saves, 1 door damns. 1 will open, whether you choose or not. A sharp chill swept through the room as the temperature plummeted further, and my breath began to fog in front of my face. Frost bloomed along the walls in delicate, sprawling patterns, the white crystals catching the dim light and scattering it in sharp, refracted beams. Midnight hissed again, louder, her tail lashing violently. Her glowing green eyes darted toward the hallway, as if she saw something I could not. I forced my own eyes to follow, though every instinct screamed at me to look away. At first I saw nothing. Then the shadows shifted. A long, spindly limb unfurled from the darkness, its joints bending in impossible angles as it grasped the door frame with elongated fingers. They scraped against the wood with a sound like nails on slate, each movement deliberate and slow, like a creature testing its own strength. My stomach churned as a second arm followed, then a head, faceless, featureless, but tilting too far to the side in an unnatural curve. The voice coiled around my mind, almost gently this time. It comes to collect. I took a step backward, only to bump into the couch behind me. Midnight remained rooted in place, her body trembling but her gaze unwavering. She let out a guttural growl that felt impossibly deep for such a small creature. The thing in the hallway paused as if noticing her, its head jerking sharply toward her with a crack of unseen bone. My heart raced violently, the thudding in my chest so loud, I wondered if the creature could hear it. The air thickened, each breath a laborious effort as my vision swam. I thought of the black and white doors again. Their images flickered behind my eyelids like a warning. The black door writhed with shadow, voices whispering faintly from within, incoherent but pleading. The white door glimmered faintly, its cracks spreading further as slivers of harsh light spilled from within. My hand tightened around the knife until pain shot through my fingers. I knew, I felt, that choosing either would come at a cost I couldn't yet comprehend. The creature moved again, stepping fully into the dim light. Its body was impossibly thin, its limbs too long, bending wrong like a marionette, animated by cruel, unseen hands. The air seemed to warp around it, heat and cold clashing violently in waves that made the walls sweat and frost simultaneously. Midnight hissed and took a step forward, positioning herself between me and the thing. Her tail lashed violently, and her ears pressed flat. The creature let out a sound, low, resonant, a growl layered with tones that made my skin crawl. It didn't seem angry, it seemed amused. The voice spoke again, still soft but dripping with hunger. The house feeds, it needs more, give or be taken. I stumbled sideways, desperate to create space, but the room felt smaller, the walls bending inward subtly as though the house itself was drawing me toward the thing. My legs felt heavy, leaden, each movement a monumental effort. Then, without warning, 3 more knocks slammed into the wall behind me. The force of them sent me staggering forward, and I barely caught myself before falling to my knees. Midnight yowled, her cry sharp and piercing. The creature jerked again, its head tilting in an unnatural spasm, as if the sound agitated it. My breath came in shallow gasps, as my chest tightened painfully. The images of the doors pulsed brighter now in my mind. Black, white, black. Their rhythm quickened in time with my heartbeat, until it was impossible to separate the two. I realized, dimly, that I had begun muttering aloud without meaning to. 1 saves, 1 damns, 1 saves, 1 damns. My voice cracked on the last repetition, my throat dry and raw. The house groaned, the sound deeper this time, almost approving. The creature stepped closer, and the floor bowed slightly beneath its weight, wood protesting with high, keening groans. Midnight hissed and leapt upward,
landing on the back of the couch with a grace that belied the tension coiled in her small frame. Her eyes flared brighter, casting eerie green light that danced across the creature's angular form. For a moment, I thought it hesitated, but then the voice came again, sharper now, almost angry. "Choose, or we choose for you." The words slammed through my mind like hammer strikes, each syllable setting off waves of nausea that made my stomach churn violently. My fingers trembled around the knife, my knuckles aching from the effort to hold on. A sudden burst of heat rolled through the room, and the white door flashed violently behind my eyelids. Light streamed through its widening cracks, flooding my vision with searing brilliance that forced me to squeeze my eyes shut. The black door pulsed in the darkness of my mind, deep and oppressive, its whispers rising to a deafening chorus of pleading voices. "Choose." The word hissed again, this time from multiple mouths, high, low, childlike, ancient, all layered together in a symphony of hunger. Midnight growled one final time, her small body vibrating with sound, and for the first time since the knocking began, the creature paused. It tilted its head sharply, as if considering something unseen, and in that silence, I realized the house wasn't asking anymore, it was demanding.
The house shifted beneath my feet, as though it were breathing. Slow, massive exhalations that caused the floorboards to groan in protest. The air vibrated faintly, not quite a sound, but a low frequency that rattled my bones and set my teeth on edge. Midnight's glowing eyes tracked the thing in the hallway as it moved with that jerky, unnatural grace, its limbs bending at angles that defied anatomy. It paused at the threshold, its faceless head tilting toward me in a movement so abrupt, I flinched. Then came the whisper, not in my ears, not even in my head, but in my very blood. The second choice waits. My breath hitched. I knew this wasn't a suggestion. The house wasn't offering any more. It was demanding, and the weight of that demand crushed me in place. My legs trembled violently, threatening to give out, but I forced myself upright. Midnight hissed, her fur standing fully on end, as she positioned herself directly between me and the creature. My thoughts spiraled in jagged loops, frantic and incoherent. The doors, there were still two. The black door whispered insistently, its voices growing louder, 1,000 overlapping pleas that made my stomach twist violently. The white door pulsed faintly, light streaming brighter through the widening cracks in its surface. Each flicker of light sent searing pain through my vision, as though looking too long might burn my retinas. The creature inched forward, one elongated arm reaching out. Its fingers dragged across the wall, leaving faint grooves in the plaster. Midnight's growl deepened, vibrating so low it felt like a second heartbeat in the room. My knife felt laughably small in my sweat-slick hand. I considered dropping it, knowing it wouldn't help, but the thought of being entirely defenseless rooted it firmly in my grip. 3 more knocks exploded through the walls, so loud they sent me staggering sideways. This time, they didn't come from one direction. They came from everywhere, left, right, above, below. The entire house vibrated with the force of them, and the sound carried a resonance that made my vision stutter and blur. My ears rang violently, and for a moment I thought I heard screaming layered within the knocks. Dozens of voices wailing in anguish. Midnight yowled in defiance, her cry cutting through the cacophony like a blade. The creature flinched, its head jerking violently, and I hoped that her sound had hurt it somehow. But then its faceless head straightened, and it took another step forward, its grotesque limbs folding
and unfolding like an insect testing its balance. I tried to back away, but the house itself resisted. The floor felt sticky beneath my feet, as though it had softened to a viscous texture meant to trap me. Each step required monumental effort, and the cold only deepened, biting into my skin until my fingers ached. My breath fogged in great heaving plumes, curling upward and vanishing into the oppressive dark. The voice returned, no longer soft or coaxing. It was sharp now, urgent, every syllable like a blade dragged across my mind. Choose before it is chosen for you. My chest tightened, my heart hammering with such violence, I half expected it to burst. The black door pulsed so brightly behind my eyes that I thought I saw its shadow leaking into the corners of the room. Midnight crouched low, her tail lashing furiously, and for a moment I thought she might leap straight at the creature. The thing stopped within arm's reach. Its limbs stretched impossibly long now, fingers curling and uncurling as if preparing to seize me. Midnight's growls became a constant low vibration that seemed to fill the room. I could hear the faint scrape of claws on wood as she dug her paws into the floor, holding her ground. The creature tilted its head again, then leaned forward slightly, its facelessness an affront to everything my mind wanted to believe about reality. The house moaned deeply, the sound resonating through the walls and floor like a great beast stirring in its sleep. Choose, the voice hissed again, and this time it came from multiple directions, inside the walls, above me, beneath my feet. Or be consumed. The images of the doors flickered violently in my mind's eye. Black, white, black, white. My body swayed with each pulse, the two choices searing themselves into my thoughts until I could barely remember anything else. I felt my knees buckle, and I hit the floor hard enough to send the knife clattering from my grip. It skittered across the wood, spinning uselessly into the shadows. Midnight hissed violently and sprang forward, positioning herself between me and the thing as it stretched a single, impossibly long finger toward me. Its fingertip stopped inches from my face, the air around it vibrating faintly like heat distortion. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. The house pressed closer now, the walls pulsing faintly as though drawing breath. My vision swam, and in that moment I understood there would be no escape. Only choice. Midnight growled one final time, and I swore her eyes flared so bright they illuminated the room like twin torches.
The creature's finger hovered inches from my face, and the air around it vibrated with such intensity I could feel the soft skin of my cheeks tremble, as if caught in a low, constant tremor. Midnight stood her ground between us, her back arched, fur fully raised, and tail puffed like a black plume of smoke. Her growl was a low, continuous rumble, too deep for her small body, as though the sound had been pulled from somewhere much older and much larger. The creature tilted its faceless head sharply, an unnatural jerk that set off a sickening crack of unseen joints. It wasn't retreating, it was waiting. The house, too, had gone still, not in peace, but in anticipation. Every creak and sigh of the walls had ceased, replaced by a thick, pressing silence that seemed alive in its own way. And then the voice returned, louder this time, slithering straight into my skull. Second knock, second choice. One door saves, one door damns. Refuse, and both damn you. The words burned through my mind, leaving behind a ringing void that only deepened my growing panic. The black and white doors pulsed violently now behind my eyelids, each flicker searing bright enough to leave
after images that floated in my vision, even when I blinked. The black door throbbed like a diseased heart, shadows spilling from beneath its threshold in inky streams that writhed and curled like grasping fingers. From within I heard voices pleading, sobbing, whispering in languages I didn't recognize but understood all the same. Their tones carried despair so deep it seemed to seep into my marrow. The white door cracked wider, and a harsh light stabbed out, cutting lines of brilliance across the walls, but there was no warmth in it. Instead, the light felt cold, clinical, like the sterile glow of a hospital corridor at 3 a.m., too bright, too empty, too inhuman. Midnight hissed violently, her glowing eyes darting between me and the pulsating doors, as if urging me to act. 3 more knocks boomed through the house. This time, they came from the floor beneath me. The boards buckled slightly, and the sound carried a reverberation so powerful my teeth rattled in my skull. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, and somewhere deep in the walls came the faint sound of laughter, not joyous, but sharp and brittle, like glass shattering under pressure. "Choose," the voice demanded again, no longer patient. "The house waits for nothing. The house takes what is owed." My hands shook violently as I reached out instinctively, though I couldn't tell if I was grasping for the black door or the white. Midnight growled louder, and for a terrifying second I thought she might leap straight at my hand to stop me. But then her growl shifted, softening into a mournful whimper that cut through the roar in my head. My chest ached at the sound. I couldn't tell if she was warning me or saying goodbye. The creature's spindly finger twitched once, and a rush of cold air slammed into me, with enough force to steal my breath. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto them, palms slamming against the freezing floor. Midnight yowled in alarm, her small body tensing to spring, but she hesitated, claws scraping against the wood. The house moaned again, louder, deeper, a guttural resonance that felt almost triumphant. Second knock, last chance, choose now. The black door's whispers rose to a crescendo, thousands of voices screaming in unison. The white door's light flared so bright it forced my eyes shut. My body trembled violently, my fingers twitching as I felt myself being pulled in 2 directions at once. One door promised an end to the hunger, the other promised an end to me. Or maybe both promised the same thing in different disguises. With a strangled gasp, I reached out. My hand found the black door, fingers pressing against its warped, oozing surface. It felt slick and alive, pulsing faintly beneath my touch. Midnight's hiss became a shriek, but I didn't stop. The house exhaled in a long, rattling sigh as the black door swung inward with a sickening wet sound. The stench of rot and damp earth rolled out in a suffocating wave, thick enough to make me gag. Darkness pooled from the doorway, spreading across the floor like oil. Within that void, shapes began to stir, human and not human, their forms twisted in ways my mind refused to fully comprehend. Faces peeled from the shadows, mouths stretching wide in silent screams as skeletal hands reached for me. The creature in the room paused, its head jerking sharply, as if acknowledging the choice. The house's voice came again, quieter now but no less venomous. "The feast begins." Midnight bolted forward, her claws flashing as she leapt straight into the spreading darkness. Her tiny body vanished within it, swallowed whole in an instant. My breath caught, a strangled cry rising in my throat. I wanted to reach for her, to pull her back, but the shadows surged forward, latching onto my legs like cold, wet vines. Pain seared through my skin as they tightened, dragging me toward the open door.
The voices rose louder, a cacophony of sobs and laughter and screams that drowned out my own panicked gasps. The blackness consumed everything. And then, silence. I blinked, my chest heaving as I found myself alone in the living room again. Midnight was gone. The creature was gone. Even the shadows had retreated, leaving only faint black stains on the floor where they had been. The house was quiet, but the quiet didn't feel like safety. It felt like a predator digesting its meal. The voice returned one final time, faint but triumphant. One night remains.
The house was no longer pretending to be a home. Its walls breathed. Its floors pulsed faintly beneath my bare feet, and the air carried a weight that pressed down on my shoulders like a hand intent on keeping me still. Midnight was gone. The image of her small black body vanishing into the writhing shadows behind the black door replayed endlessly in my mind, but I couldn't summon tears anymore. There was nothing left in me to weep with. My throat was raw from screaming in dreams and waking alike. The windows no longer reflected anything but blackness. Even my own face refused to appear in the glass, as though the house had erased my presence from itself. And yet I felt watched, always watched. The voice had not spoken since the last choice, but its absence was no relief. It had withdrawn like a predator coiling to strike, and I sensed it would return louder, sharper, and final. One night, one knock, one choice. The words clung to the inside of my skull like mold spreading unseen. The air smelled of blood now, coppery and sweet, thick enough to coat the back of my tongue with every reluctant breath. I moved cautiously through the house, gripping the knife that no longer felt like a weapon. It was a comfort object at best, a thin strip of steel between me and whatever waited in the dark. The walls shifted as I passed, their surfaces rippling faintly like disturbed water. I tried not to look too closely, afraid I'd see faces pressing out from behind the wallpaper, their eyes wide and mouths agape in endless silent screams. The floorboards whispered under my weight, their faint creaks forming patterns I almost thought I could understand. A language older than words. The house wasn't just alive now. It was aware, and it was hungry. Midnight's absence left the place colder somehow, less tethered to anything resembling reality. The voice had promised one night remained. I wondered, in the stillness, if surviving it would matter. When the knock came, it was not a polite rapping at the door. It was a sound that split the house in two, a single earth-shaking blow that sent plaster raining from the ceiling and cracked the floor beneath my feet. I staggered, slamming against the wall, my fingers clutching the knife hard enough to make my knuckles ache. The sound reverberated long after it stopped, humming deep in my chest, like the echo of a great bell. The house groaned, its beams flexing like ribs around a great inhalation. Last night, last choice. The voice didn't so much speak as roar, every syllable a physical force that rattled my bones and left my ears ringing. My vision blurred at the edges, darkening faintly, as if the house had decided light was no longer necessary. I swallowed hard against the rising bile in my throat, forcing my feet to move, though every instinct screamed at me to freeze. The black and white doors flickered faintly in my mind's eye, more vivid now than ever. Their presence was suffocating, as though they'd been drawn closer, one on either side of me. My steps carried me to the center of the living room, though I couldn't remember walking there. The air grew thicker with every breath, filling my lungs like liquid. The house vibrated faintly, a deep thrum that kept time with my heartbeat.
Shadows lengthened unnaturally along the walls, twisting in ways light shouldn't allow. From the corner of my vision, movement caught my eye, a familiar shape, midnight, or something wearing her shape. She crouched at the edge of the room, her glowing green eyes fixed on me, but there was no recognition in them. Her fur rippled in waves, as though something beneath her skin shifted impatiently. A low growl rumbled from her throat, but it carried no warmth, no warning. It was a predator's sound, and it vibrated in my teeth. The voice spoke again, softer now, but with a weight that bent my knees slightly. All debts are paid. One saves, one damns, both hunger. My lips parted, but no words emerged. Midnight's head tilted sharply, her eyes narrowing. The creature emerged from the hallway then, no longer content to linger in shadows. Its spindly limbs unfolded endlessly, its height scraping the ceiling as it stepped into the room. Its facelessness was even more obscene in full view, a void where a head should have been, and from within that emptiness came faint whispers, many voices overlapping in a chorus of misery. It paused behind Midnight, its long fingers brushing the air inches from her twitching tail. I wanted to call to her, to scream, but my throat locked as though the house itself had wrapped invisible fingers around it. The walls pulsed faintly, their movements growing more pronounced with each passing second. From somewhere deep below, I heard it, the sound of hundreds of hands knocking in perfect unison, a sound like the heart of the world breaking apart. My knees buckled again, and I sank to the floor. Midnight hissed, her eyes flaring brighter than I'd ever seen. Then the voice came one final time, whisper and roar combined. Choose.
The word echoed like a physical force, vibrating through the floorboards, rattling the cracked windows in their frames, and slamming into my chest hard enough to drive the breath from my lungs. It wasn't a suggestion or even a demand anymore. It was a sentence, a command written in the bones of the house itself. Midnight's growl deepened as she took a single deliberate step toward me, her glowing eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, unwavering. Something about the way she moved was wrong, not in the same grotesque way as the faceless thing looming behind her, but wrong in a quieter, subtler way that made my skin crawl even as a part of me longed to reach for her. The creature's spindly limbs flexed faintly as though preparing to strike, its fingerless hands twitching at its sides in a parody of anticipation. The house pulsed again, and this time I could hear faint heartbeats within the walls, not one, but hundreds, each slightly out of sync, forming a wet, fleshy rhythm that filled my ears and set my stomach churning. I tried to speak, but no words would come. My tongue felt too large, my mouth dry as bone. Midnight crept closer, her fur rippling unnaturally, as though a second skin shifted beneath her sleek black coat. The air between us vibrated with energy so thick it felt like wading through a swamp. One end, the voice whispered, not as loud as before, but so sharp each word sliced at my sanity. My thoughts fragmented around it, splintering into shards that jabbed painfully whenever I tried to focus. Images of the black and white doors assaulted my mind again, now so vivid, it felt like they existed physically on either side of me. The black door heaved like a living lung, exhaling rot and shadow. The white door gleamed like polished bone, its cracks running deeper as pale light spilled in pulsing waves across the rotting floorboards. The house seemed to tilt toward me, walls leaning inward, the ceiling lowering by imperceptible degrees. It was closing in.
Then came the knocking. 1, 2, 3. Each impact reverberated upward from the foundation, so powerful I felt dust rain down on my head and shoulders in gritty streams. The sound wasn't confined to the walls anymore. It lived in the air, thrumming in my teeth, coiling down my spine like a cold, wet rope. Midnight's tail lashed sharply as she crouched, her body tense and ready to spring. The faceless thing loomed behind her, its 2 long limbs twitching with restrained hunger. Its head jerked sharply, its unseen gaze shifting toward the black door. "Choose," the voice hissed again. This time the syllables overlapped, hundreds of different voices speaking as one, male and female, young and ancient, all tinted with desperation. My breathing quickened, and my chest ached, as though the air itself had turned toxic. A flash of motion drew my eye. Midnight leapt suddenly, landing soundlessly before me. Her eyes burned brighter now than any light in the house, 2 emerald flames flickering with an unnatural, hypnotic rhythm. She opened her mouth, and I expected a hiss, a growl, but instead came a sound that froze my blood. A whisper. "You owe." It wasn't my voice. It wasn't human at all. It was low and guttural, layered like multiple throats speaking at once. My legs buckled beneath me, and I collapsed to the floor, the cold boards leaching the last warmth from my skin. My knife clattered away into the shadows, forgotten and useless. Midnight crept closer still, until her nose nearly touched mine. Away the house. Away me. Her pupils flared into vertical slits, her fur rippling with subtle, unnatural movements beneath the surface. The knocking intensified. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. A relentless rhythm that filled the room, shaking loose flakes of plaster from the ceiling. The creature in the corner unfolded itself fully, its spindly limbs creaking like old timber as it advanced a single step. Its head tilted as though studying me, its movements jerky and wrong. "Choose or feed," the voice thundered again, louder this time, carrying with it a pressure that made my ears pop violently. Blood trickled from my nose in a thin, hot stream. Midnight's burning eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time since this began, I saw something behind them. Not hunger, not malice, but something like sadness. She blinked once, slowly, and spoke again. "One stays, one leaves. Which are you?" I tried to crawl backward, but the floor beneath my palms had grown tacky, clinging to my skin like glue. The house groaned loudly, its beams flexing with a sound like ribs cracking under strain. From somewhere deep within the walls came a chorus of wails, hundreds of voices screaming in perfect unison. My heartbeat slammed wildly in my chest, my vision flickering with black spots. Midnight moved closer still, her glowing eyes filling my entire world as her whisper came again, soft but final. "Choose." Midnight's eyes were all I could see now, twin green flames burning so brightly. They seemed to cast their own sickly light, painting the walls in writhing, flickering shadows. Her pupils were thin vertical slits, unblinking, fixed upon me with a predatory intensity that pinned me to the floor. My hands scrabbled weakly at the boards beneath me, but they had grown soft and sticky, clinging to my fingers as though the house itself had decided to hold me still. The air thickened further, pressing down on my chest until each breath became a shallow, wheezing effort. The walls moaned around us, a low, resonant sound like the house was laughing or weeping or both. The knocking had become constant now,
no longer in rhythmic threes, but in a chaotic cascade of hammering that seemed to come from every surface at once. My ears rang with it, my teeth ached with the vibration, and my vision swam as though the floor had tilted under a rising tide. Midnight spoke again, her voice softer but no less terrible. The house hungers, it waits, it remembers. The words slid through my mind like a slick, cold blade. Behind her, the faceless thing moved closer, its two long limbs folding and unfolding in grotesque spider-like jerks. Its presence radiated cold so intense frost began to spiderweb across the floorboards in delicate, deadly patterns, creeping toward my outstretched fingers. The shadows along the walls pulsed faintly, forming vague human shapes that pressed their faces to the wallpaper, mouths open in silent screams. One saves, the chorus of voices whispered from all sides. One damns. The black and white doors flared in my mind's eye, their images so bright, it hurt to look even with my eyes squeezed shut. The black door throbbed like a wounded organ, its surface crawling with dark tendrils that writhed hungrily. The white door glimmered, pure but harsh, its cracks widening to reveal a searing void within. Both called to me with equal urgency, their demands overlapping until I couldn't separate their voices from my own frantic thoughts. Midnight blinked slowly, and when her eyes reopened, the light within them seemed to burn hotter, angrier. "Choose now," she said, "or be chosen." A violent shudder ran through the house, nearly pitching me onto my side, as the floor heaved like the back of a great beast, rising beneath my weight. Plaster rained from the ceiling in choking clouds, and I could hear wood splitting somewhere distant, deep cracks echoing like gunshots. The knocking reached a fever pitch, a storm of impact so deafening I clamped my hands over my ears to no avail. The sound lived inside my skull now, reverberating through my bones and teeth. I opened my mouth to scream but found I couldn't. The house had stolen even that from me. My knife was gone, swallowed into the creeping darkness pooling across the floor like a living thing. Midnight's tail lashed sharply, her body tense and vibrating with some internal energy that seemed moments from exploding. She crouched low as if preparing to strike, her gaze never leaving mine. The faceless thing's limbs flexed once, twice, before it began crawling. Yes, crawling, along the ceiling, its grotesque body folding wrong, joints cracking loudly, as it moved like an enormous, horrific insect toward where I lay pinned. My heart pounded wildly, each beat so loud it felt like a drum inside my head. My breath came in shallow, wheezing gasps as my body trembled violently. "Choose," the voice roared again, now overlapping with itself dozens, no, hundreds of times, creating a tidal wave of sound that crushed every coherent thought. One survives. One feeds. Both hunger. The images of the doors flickered more violently, their light spilling out to consume my vision entirely. The black door's tendrils reached greedily toward me, promising a cold, endless embrace. The white door's light seared hot enough. I thought my skin might blister, offering salvation or annihilation. I could no longer tell the difference. Midnight's body tensed, her claws digging shallow furrows into the wood as she hissed, a sound so loud and sharp it seemed to cut through the cacophony for a single fragile second. "Now," she whispered, "choose or be devoured." But I couldn't. My mind clawed frantically for answers, for any hint of which choice would save me, but there was nothing, no logic, no pattern, no mercy, only hunger. The house's walls rippled again,
and the shadowy faces pressed harder against the wallpaper, their features distorted in eternal agony. A low, wet sound rose from the floor, and I realized with horror that the boards beneath me had begun to soften further, their grain splitting to reveal oozing red-black flesh beneath the surface. It pulsed faintly, a heartbeat that matched my own, and I felt it begin to warm under my palms. The house was alive, and it wanted me inside it. Midnight's hiss cut sharply through my mounting terror. One door, one end, choose. Her eyes narrowed to burning slits, and for a moment impossibly, I thought I saw tears glimmering there, if such a thing were even possible anymore.
The house shook violently, a deep, guttural rumble that vibrated through the floor and up my spine. It felt like being inside the ribcage of a great, dying animal, each creak and groan of wood, and plaster a mournful death rattle. Midnight's eyes burned brighter than ever, almost too bright to look at. Twin beacons of unnatural green that fixed me in place with suffocating intensity. The faceless thing on the ceiling scuttled closer, its long limbs bending and cracking with every grotesque movement, until it hung directly above me, its featureless head tilted down as though studying me, unseen eyes boring into my skull. I tried to scream again, but no sound came. My throat felt sewn shut by invisible threads. Choose, the voice said one final time, now deeper, colder, and unrecognizable. It wasn't just inside my head anymore. It came from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, even from beneath my own skin. My blood seemed to carry the sound, my heart pounding it out in frantic beats. Choose, or be consumed entirely. The black and white doors loomed in my mind's eye, their presence so overwhelming it felt as though they now existed physically in the room, one on either side of me. The black door writhed with shadows that leaked across the floor, tendrils curling hungrily toward my outstretched hands. The whispers from behind it had grown louder, now distinct, pleading, "Join us. It's easier, so much easier." The white door's light pulsed furiously, searing cracks spreading like veins across its surface. From within, I heard faint singing, a choir of voices both beautiful and terrible, harmonizing in a melody that threatened to split my skull in two. I couldn't tell which was salvation, which was damnation, or if either offered anything but ruin. Midnight hissed again, her small body vibrating with sound so powerful it made the floor beneath her ripple like water. "Choose now," she whispered, her voice layered with countless others, "or I will choose for you." The floor beneath me gave way suddenly, splitting open in jagged, yawning cracks that exhaled a sickly stench of decay and damp earth. Fingers, long, skeletal, and slick with something wet, began to emerge from the fissures, clutching at the edges as if pulling themselves out of the void. From below came the sound of countless voices screaming in anguish, a rising wail that made my teeth ache. Midnight's tail lashed sharply, her glowing eyes narrowing to deadly slits. I felt the house breathing faster now, its hunger growing frantic. My hands trembled violently as I reached out blindly, unable to think, unable to reason. My fingers brushed against the black door's surface, its skin-like texture warm and pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Midnight's voice cut sharply through my mind, louder than ever. One lives, one feeds, one burns forever. The faceless thing descended suddenly, its spindly limbs reaching for me, and the air around us exploded with cold so intense my breath crystallized instantly. Midnight leapt between us,
her small frame glowing faintly with an emerald fire that seemed to repel the creature momentarily. But the house wouldn't wait anymore. The shadows surged forward, wrapping around my legs and pulling me toward the black door, while the blinding light from the white door flared violently, burning my retinas even through closed eyelids. The chorus from within the white door rose louder, its melody twisting into a shriek. I didn't know which way I turned, only that my hand found one door handle and wrenched it open in desperation. A scream tore through the house. Not mine, not human, not animal. Midnight's glow faded in a heartbeat as she vanished into the door I'd chosen, her emerald eyes the last thing to disappear. The house went still, silent. The faceless thing retreated slowly into the shadows, folding its grotesque limbs until it vanished entirely. The floor closed beneath me, as though nothing had ever happened. I was alone, but the air felt wrong, too dense, too heavy, as if something vast and unseen still pressed down on the house from all sides. "The debt is paid," the voice whispered faintly, so quiet I almost believed I imagined it. I stumbled to my feet, my body trembling so violently. It was a miracle I could stand. The house looked the same as it had on my first night. Walls intact, floors unbroken, furniture sitting placidly in its place. But it didn't feel the same. The silence was too complete, too suffocating, as if the house were holding its breath. I looked for Midnight instinctively, but she was gone. Only a faint smudge of black fur remained on the floor where she had last stood. I reached for the door to leave, my hand trembling as it grasped the knob. As I turned it, a final sound echoed faintly through the house. Knock, knock.
And so, the house fell silent. But silence doesn't always mean safety. Somewhere beyond those walls, beyond that final knock, something still waits, hungry, patient, watching for the next one to step through its door. If this story left you glancing over your shoulder tonight, don't worry, you're not alone. There are more tales, more cursed houses, more whispers in the dark, waiting to be unearthed. Subscribe now and join us as we dive deeper into the shadows of forgotten histories, unsettling mysteries, and the places that refuse to let go of those who enter. The next knock might be for you.